Yo, everybody. Welcome to Off Panel, a weekly interview podcast about all things comics, brought to you by Sketch.com. I'm your host, David Harper, and this week's guest is the writer of the currently being Kickstarted graphic novel, The Dusk, as well as The Black Ghost at Comixology Originals. And he's also the co-president of Archie Comics. It's Alex Segura. Thanks for coming on, Alex.
Hey, thanks for having me. This is cool. It's been a while.
It has been, as I was just telling my wife, it is a record-setting podcast because the first time you came on was episode number 7, and this is number 299. So 292 episodes. That's quite the break.
Yeah, I feel like we've kept in touch. It's not like there was falling out of some kind.
That's just everyone else that's never come on the podcast. Just lots and lots of falling outs. Well, we're going to get into all of your recent comics work as well as what's going on with Archie, but we're going to start with the main topic of the week, the Snyder Cut. America's wondering, Alex, scale of 10 to 150, what did you think about the new version of the Justice League that debuted this week?
What's funny, we were chatting about this before, but I don't have time for 4-hour movies. I just haven't gotten to it. I mean, I'll watch it at some point, but I wish I had seen it. What did you think?
I haven't watched it.
Yeah.
I was just joking just because it's like everyone's talking about it. Like, I have family members texting me and asking me, what did you think of this movie? And I'm like, I'm not really that interested. And they're like, but you have a podcast about comics. I'm like, it's an adaptation. I don't really do podcasts about adaptations.
Yeah, that's so funny. Yeah, I've had a few people outside of the industry say, hey, did you check it out? And I just haven't had time. And I mean, I'll get to it at like I do with any major comic book movie, I will get to it at some point, but it's not, I saw some people watching it multiple times, and I'm just amazed at that level of free time.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting. Anytime something's in like the broader landscape of nerddom, I feel like people just kind of glom onto it. Like, for example, this is a perfect example. I was going to bring this up, but I think this gives me a good opportunity. I do a lot of research in previous interviews that people have done where I read up on what they had done, what they've been talking about, et cetera, et cetera. And you wrote a book last year, or you released a book last year, Poe Dameron Freefall, it's a Star Wars book. And it's really funny because you can tell that people really love talking about Star Wars because you have this like insane spike in 2020 of interviews where it's just you talking about Poe Dameron over and over and over. And yeah. I think that's what happens with things like the Snyder Cut or, Star Wars books or whatever. It's just like there's something about it that is just like light, or Maz being attracted to light. You just can't resist it. You just
tap into something that's bigger than you, I guess. I did an interview with NPR. I was on Planet Money for a couple episodes. They're doing this series on IP, and it happened to be run on All Things Considered. Like, they just, I guess, rerun the episode, and I was getting texts and emails and Facebook messages from like people, and it was almost like a This Is Your Life episode. And it's just, there's certain times you're in the big pop culture consciousness, which is neat. And but yeah, something like the Snyder Cut, for me and for you, I guess, we're already kind of in the weeds on it, so it's not as urgent or as big a thing to us. And I'm curious to see it. It's just not something I'm going to catch this weekend.
Yeah. No doubt. But okay, let's get into the real stuff. I did want to start by talking about this very interesting time that we're in, just because, I think it's basically like the 1-year anniversary. I think it was last week where things really got hinky last year. And yeah. I'm interested in your perspective on this because you have a very unique perspective within comics. You're one of the few people who walks the line between creator and publisher. As I noted before, you're the co-president of Archie Comics, but you also write comics and you do a lot of stuff related to comics. What was the last year like for you?
It's interesting. My birthday's in March. It was March 15th. So we were getting ready. We had just come back from Miami from a vacation with the family, and we were still doing like preliminary planning it was a notable birthday. So it was like 40. So we thought we'd make hay of it. And there was a point where we just were like, nothing, we can't do that. Like, and it sounds a little self-centered, but at that point we didn't know what this was going to become. It was like this thing far away that was inching its way to us. And it's been interesting because I'm so used to going to an office. I've never not gone into an office. I've always, even writing at any level, at any freelance level, I've still had a day job or had, whether it's in journalism or doing publicity, or at Archie, it's a much more blended role. But I would go into the office, do my work, and then come home and, do family stuff and do my other work. It was like literally putting on the second hat. But now it all kind of came crashing together. So it became just on the microscopic, like day-to-day level, it became a lot of time management. And it's changed everyone's lives. And for us, it's just been, we're all in this tiny apartment together, and kind of, there's no buffers. There's no like time away. You know, I'd go to the office and have time for myself in the car, and you know, it's different worlds. Whereas now we're all in this tiny little bubble together. That's become the term, like you're in your bubble and you can open up your bubble and share your bubble with other people. Our son's been doing virtual school, which is challenging. I mean, he's 5. And so it's just kind of, you know, you raise your kids to not have too much screen time, and now suddenly we have to have screen time just to have these basic things. It's been challenging. It's been hard. It's just been about being flexible and being adaptable and trying to holding on to the things that are important to you. And it was scary. I mean, in New York, particularly, those first few months were really terrifying. I think those effects are going to be felt for a long time. I remember those first few months, and Queens was particularly hit hard in those early months, and we didn't really know what it was yet. So there was a lot of uncertainty, a lot of anxiety, and I think we're going to be feeling it for a long time. I think we're all excited to inch back to normal, but it's not going to be normal in the way we remember it.
I'd never thought about the screen time thing before. That's really wild. I mean, it's going to be tough to go back to telling your kids, like, nah, you get limited screen time. Like, well, I've been doing this for like, you know, a year or whatever. That's
even every social interaction has been like, let's Zoom with grandma, or let's do this family Zoom, or, you know, let's Zoom, you know, everything is on video. And so for him, it's going to be weird to go back to a time where we actually go visit people. And I guess the saving grace is that it's not a singular thing that's only affecting our kids. It's affecting all kids. And so we're all kind of riding this wave together, but it's in terms of work, I've tried to just kind of keep the same firewall. You know, during the day I work on my Archie stuff, and then at night or on weekends I work on my other stuff, and that's worked out okay. It's just the work-life balance isn't balanced anymore. You're at home, so you pop away from your desk and you help with the kids, and I think it's fine. It's fine. It's just been hard.
I'm right there with you with the separation, because it's like when you'd have an office, or even like, okay, here's an example. It's like, I like working at coffee shops when I'm writing. And that obviously was off the table for pandemic reasons. And so then all of a sudden everything gets folded into the same room. And it's just like, I don't know. I think that's part of the problem, part of where some of the time stuff comes from, where people are just like, what day is it? What time is it? And it just like kind of all weaves together. But, you know, I am interested though, if it has affected how you've been thinking both as a creator and as an executive at a publisher, because, you know, obviously there was big change, you know, Diamond shutting down for a time. There's all this different stuff going on. I know a lot of creators were talking about, like, you know, is this the right move for me? Has that been shifting your thinking at all?
Well, you know, in terms of the Kickstarter, I think it did. I mean, we saw the big uptick in how people were responding to it and going directly to consumers. And I was always curious about it. It's just one of those things you always have in the back of your mind, like maybe I'll try that one day and see what it's like. But I think the publishing landscape changed, especially with Diamond shutting down. I think from the Archie perspective, our immediate thought was, okay, how can we help retailers? You know, let's make our stuff returnable. Let's try to, you know, engage with them directly. And thankfully that window where Diamond was gone, which was still, it was long. Any period without a distributor is going to feel endless, but it was not as long as the worst case scenario where it would have just been kind of chaos.
Right.
And the benefit for someone like us, like Archie, is that we have a lot of different channels. You know, we're pretty vibrant on the newsstand. There's a lot of kind of general pop culture awareness from the shows, and we have a strong book market presence. So at first, you know, there was definitely panic and stress, but, you know, we were not solely a comic shop company. But from the creator level, you want to connect with people that are reading your work. And I think creators instinctively are going to try new things and see what sticks. And the benefit of something from Kickstarter is that the benefit of something like Kickstarter or Indiegogo or crowdsourcing is you're funding the project, and then you can do whatever you want with it. Then it exists. And I've always told people, if someone discovers a way to really link up Kickstarter with comic shops, and maybe it exists and I just don't know about it, but a meaningful way where someone can fund a Kickstarter and then it'll end up in comic shops outside of like having to then repitch the project or find some kind of new business arrangement. They will make a lot of money, or at least help a lot of people. And I think that's really, to me, having already been kind of in the thick of the Kickstarter, that to me is like the next step for people creating comics on Kickstarter, then having a way to then get it into comic shops, a turnkey way. Now, I'm not saying like then have to shop it around again, because I know there are publishers that, that's their business model. They kickstart stuff, or they seek out projects that are funded on Kickstarter and then kind of republish them. And I think that's smart, because then you really trimmed the level of investment you have to make, and then you just need to print and distribute. And that's why you're with Diamond, or with, you have a distributor. So yeah, I think that's the next step. I think people want to then be able to have their Kickstarter, get it funded, and then send it out into the world. And I think some people have created that business model, like Ominous Press, who we're working with on the Dusk. That's their model. They run Kickstarters and then fund the project and then sell the books. And I think they do have some mechanism with Diamond. So that was really appealing to us.
Yeah. It is really interesting to see how people are kind of finding different ways to manipulate the structure to make it work, because it's like, I mean, I remember I think the first time I saw this happen, and this may be a unfair statement as to how it was structured, but God, was it Rebecca Isaacs and Brandon Montclair? No, not Rebecca Isaacs. Amy Reeder did Rocket Girl. They funded it via a Kickstarter, like the first issue, I think it was. And then it was published.
I forgot it was a Kickstarter.
Yeah.
Because, you forget.
Yeah, and I think that effectively what they were doing was using that for page rates, because they were publishing it through Image anyways. And I think that that's kind of been one of the things that's been popping up lately, is like, oh, you can do creator owned, but you can't get page rates. But if you do a Kickstarter, you kind of get your own page rate. And it's kind of like, I don't know, reverse engineering is not right, but it's like something like that. And it is interesting to see all the different ways people are doing it. But so let's get into the Dusk, though. We're going to get into Archie stuff towards the end, but let's get into the real reason why you're here. That's the Dusk. You're now currently being kickstarted graphic novel, The Dusk, which you're doing with co-writer Elizabeth Little, line artist David Hahn, colorist Ellie Wright, letterer Taylor Esposito, editor Joseph Illage, and in conjunction with the aforementioned Ominous Press as the de facto publisher. This is, on the surface, a typical vigilante or superhero story about a character named The Dusk who protects the city of Blackstone. But I know that's not actually true. I mean, at least on its typical nature. Let's start with its origin, at least. And one thing I'm really curious about is, just based off of what you're saying, it sounds like you've been talking about this for a bit, not just the idea of it, but also the Kickstarter of it. Where did this project come from?
Yeah, you're totally right. I think, we talked a little bit about this before we flipped the switch, but, my son loves superheroes. He, and I guess it's by design, like he sees me engage with it, and he's interested. He's 5. He's really interested in the costumes and all those things and the mythos. And, we've read a lot of comics together. We've read a lot of like kid-friendly comics, and he really digs stuff like Batman and, Spider-Man, and especially the Rogues Gallery. But one of the things I noticed, even in the kind of kid-friendly stuff, is just there's a lot of violence, and there's a lot of, toss him in jail and the problem is solved. And I say this as someone with great love for the genre. I love superheroes, and I think that's part of the trope. It's just, you can't get into the weeds on everything, and sometimes it's just you're telling a good adventure. And I wasn't as concerned with it, to be honest. And my wife, who's a public interest lawyer, was more concerned. She said, it would be great if there was something, that just dug in a little deeper, that wasn't, had maybe the hero reconsider some of these things as they happen, especially in the world we live in now. And that stuck with me. And it's one of these, with ideas, they kind of buzz around your brain. And when you have a moment to get to them, you start tinkering with it. And I jotted down a few ideas. I kind of built the basic tent poles of the mythos, like what's the name with the city, like you want to honor the superhero genre and kind of harken back to the elements of it, and then find places to tweak it and invert it and flip it in a fun way. Like it's really a love letter to superheroes. It's not a this is what superheroes have been doing wrong. It's much more like this is what we love, and these are the things we would tinker with. And also having a crime fiction background, writing novels in that space, for me, the best crime novels it's not just the mystery, it's also the journey, and it's about, showing you a new place, or showing you, putting a spotlight on what's going on in the world, and maybe, some of the problems that we're all facing. And sometimes the best crime novels, the crime is secondary or tertiary to the character or the place they live or the things they're going through. So I wanted to bring a little bit of that into this too. But I think the big mission for me with it was, can I do it in a way that I could then literally hand it to my son and say, here, read this. Like this will be fun, or we can read this together. And so I think the journey is literally on the page. Jaime Nunez, who is the Dusk, is a public defender in this city, and he's doing it for all the right reasons. He's actually a cheerful guy. He's not the typical dark vigilante. He's much more. I think I told you he's much more like Mark Waid's Wally West. Like he's just, he's a hero. He wants to do good. He wants to help, and he wants to do it the right way. And he's a dad, which I wish we saw more of in superhero comics. I wish that dynamic was such a big part of the idea itself. So I wanted to really integrate it into the story. And he gets a little burnt out. You can only do so much being a public defender. There's so many hours in the day. You have a caseload that's a huge caseload, and the criminal justice system is a flawed beast. So what if the idea of the vigilante or crime fighter gets flipped and it becomes additive, and what more can he do? And there's no easy answers, and that's I think the big message from the book. He's not going to just suddenly figure it out, because I think we're all trying to figure it out. Like, what is good today, and how can somebody actually do good by putting on a costume? But I also wanted, like I said, I wanted to tell that story in a not grim, dark way. I wanted it to be something bright and, something that harkens back to stuff like Batman Adventures or the animated series, or that level of entertainment and kind of clean line work and really dynamic art. And that's a big reason why David was brought in.
David
I've
Hahn.
just been such a fan of it. Yeah, David Hahn. I've been such a fan of his work, and I think he really kind of evokes that style. And he's a dad too. He's got a teenager. Elizabeth's a mom, and I think we are all coming at it from this perspective of wanting to tell these stories in a way that we can also pass them on and share them with our kids. And I'm sure maybe 20 years from now, my son will listen to this and groan, but and maybe he won't want to read it. But I think that was the impetus, and it's definitely not a way of us saying, oh, this is what superheroes are doing wrong. It's much more, well, maybe we can try it this way, and it's different, and we can tell these stories in a not as dark way, but still manage to get people thinking. And that's really the idea, just to get people thinking, not so much about, being corrective.
Right. Well, I mean, I do think that not only is it a sensible move because of, your personal situation, of the fact that you're having those conversations about what your son is engaging with and everything like that, but it is interesting because I feel like it fits within, the societal direction as well, because, I remember popping up in 2020 multiple times. There was a conversation about, like, why doesn't Batman stop punching criminals and uses billions to try to help, make societal change? And obviously that's a much more complicated thing, because I don't think Jaime is a billionaire as a public defender. But at the same time, I think it's rooted in the same idea. Is like, is this necessary? Like, is punching criminals because they're in this situation that they might not have a strong or a lot of control over, is that the right move? And I don't want you to get too...
and also, I'm sorry to interrupt. And also one of the things is like, when you are now interjecting yourself in the process of justice, like, what does that mean for, due process? If someone comes in and starts punching you and then you get thrown into jail, like that, you need someone that's aware of of the process and what's legal, what's fair, and what's, what rights these people have. You can't just and look, like you said, it's not going to be solved right away. It's not something that can be solved in a comic book, but I thought it would be interesting to just raise those questions and have someone, like, he's a lawyer. He comes into this money. It's not like Bruce Wayne level money, but that's the mystery. Like, who sent him this money? Who sent him these tools to be a hero? And what is he supposed to do? And how can he do it the right way? I think, he doesn't really come to these conclusions on page one. I think on page one, he's trying to be kind of a Batman type. He's like, this is cool. I can punch the bad guys and I can do good. And then the journey is he's realizing, well, this isn't the way. This is not the only way to do that. And it's funny because they do, with Batman, they do try to in oftentimes, to show him doing good, there's the Wayne Foundation, or, he does a lot of, helpful things for the community. And I think there are limitations to the narrative. We can only do so much in the space of a comic book, but,
especially while still being entertaining.
Exactly. Yeah. And you want to have those tropes. You want to have the colorful villains, and you want to have the mystery and all these things that draw people in. So we don't want the book to feel like a lesson, but we want it to be entertaining, but we also want to make people think. That's the big takeaway. I want people to read it and say, oh, yeah, this is a little different and interesting.
Yeah. I mean, it's a very, actually, like listening to you talk about it, it's almost like Jaime is going through the arc that you all are going through, where you're trying to find a better way to do this, but he's doing it as a character.
Yes, that's literally it. I mean, yes, you nailed it. And I think somebody said, a lot of good writers, better writers than I have said, every character you write has a piece of you, whether it's everyone always assumes, oh, the protagonist is you. Like, with my Pete novels, everyone's like, oh, is that you? And it's like, it's not me. Everyone is me. There's always a slice of you or your journey or what you're thinking about in every character. And I think you're right that Jaime, we're working through stuff with him. And it doesn't mean that by the end of the graphic novel, there's going to be a big splash where he says, I've discovered the solution. I will now become this other thing. It's just not that linear, but it's okay. One thing about crime fiction that I love is that there's so many gray areas, and that nothing is always resolved. Like, even just, you may solve the crime, but there's always a penalty, it's not a clean solution. And I wanted to think of that in terms of comics, and in terms of comics drawn this way that are clearly like meant to be friendly to all age groups. And it's okay to introduce that to your kids. We like, for our kids, our daughter's going to be 2, so she's not really at that level yet, but our son, we want him to like think about things in a complicated way and realize that it's not binary. There's no like good or bad. Things are complicated, and it's okay to introduce that and have them think about it and have them wonder. And it's okay for us to do that too. We live in a complicated world, and it's not all easy solutions.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny, like this makes me think of Daredevil, who's, another famous lawyer superhero hybrid. And
right.
I've always like kind of had a hard time reconciling his part of the process, given all you're saying about with due process and everything like that. It is fascinating. I don't know if you're reading it, but Chip Zdarsky is addressing that in a very interesting way in his current run on Daredevil. But not to compliment another comic during a podcast about your comic, but
oh no, I love Chip. I'm a big Chip fan. I've been really enjoying his Daredevil run, and Daredevil is this is kind of a love letter to him too, like to Batman and Daredevil and those kind of iconic superheroes, but putting our own little twist on it, and diversifying the protagonist, making him a dad. There's we're just kind of tinkering with the tinkering, I feel like, undermines what we're doing. We're doing it our way, which is kind of what you want from comics. And I think that's one of the benefits of something like Kickstarter or Create Our Own Stories, that you can take these tropes and these elements and these genres and make it your own, and they can live in the same space, which is exciting.
Yo, everybody. I want to take a quick second to give a shout out to my friends at Bad Idea. You may have heard of this experimental new comic book publisher. They're the crew that debuted recently in select comic shops worldwide with Matt Kint and Doug Braithwaite's ENIAC #1. And they did that a little differently than their peers. First, each issue is oversized and ad-free. Second, each issue comes with a bonus B-side story, giving readers a little something extra with each issue. Lastly, and this is the wild part, so listen up, they don't publish variants, trades, or digital versions of their comics, so if you want one or all of them, you better get to the Bad Idea retailer near you and be there on a Wednesday. Don't have one near you? Order online or explore your options for mail order at badideacorp.com to make sure you don't miss out on ENIAC or upcoming titles from creators like Zeb Wells, David LaFuente, Marguerite Bennett, and many more. And now, back to the show. I am interested in one of the things that I've heard the most when it comes to like all ages books or anything that's at least partially aimed at kids is kids really can sniff out when they're being like, I don't want to say talked down to, but like, when they're being aimed at almost. It's like they don't want to be the one who is being deliberately catered to, because they think of themselves as not just a kid. They think of themselves as thinkers. They can think, and they can handle things that are, for people that are older than them. Is there, I don't know. Is that something you and like Elizabeth are conscientious of as you're writing this book? Because you want to speak to them in a way that's different than superhero books normally do, but you don't want to talk down to them. It's like there's a fine line there.
No, you're totally right. And I think kids, and I remember this being a kid too, you always want to read above your station. You don't want to, I didn't want to read when I was 8 or 9. I wanted to read X-Men and Spider-Man. Had aged out of Archie at that point. And my parents were still like, you should read these because they're safer for you. And I think my son too, if and when I hand this to him, I don't want it to be prefaced by, this is a better way to do things. I want him to enjoy it as an adventure and then have the lessons, quote unquote, be something that just kind of feeds in naturally, like something you just, the way we read things and take things away. And I don't want him to feel like it's a school assignment. And now that he knows that these books exist, he reads all this stuff. I think he wants to read Batman and he wants to read stuff like that because it's entertaining and he'll come to these conclusions on his own, independent of the Dusk. Like that's not our mission statement. I think he'll figure out that there's much more to it. But yeah, kids are not going to respond to something that feels like homework.
No. I do want to quickly point out that I was the 8th grade kid who was doing book reports on James Ellroy novels. And so,
oh man,
oh yeah, my
hopefully
teacher.
Not white jazz.
What's that?
Hopefully not white jazz.
No, it was not. My teacher actually had a call with my mom because she was just like, "What the hell is your son reading?" And I was like, "I like what can I say? I like James Ellroy." Anyways,
yeah, no, I was a kid. I was a kid writing like book reports on like presidential biographies in elementary school, and we were nerds, and that's fine.
Yeah, totally. Okay, well, let's talk about the team a little bit. I mentioned Elizabeth Little, your co-writer, a fellow novelist. Given its origins, I mean, this is fundamentally built from you and your wife talking about this and like thinking about your son and everything. I would have expected this to be a solo joint. What made having a co-writer the right move, and why was Elizabeth the right person for the job?
Yeah, I thought it was going to be a solo joint too, and David and I were talking, and he had done a few initial designs, and Liz and I are friends, and we were both on the board of Mystery Writers of America, and we're in a writers group together, and so we were talking about this, and she's a fan of graphic novels, she's a parent, and it kind of started out as, can you read this and just give me your take? Like sometimes you just want to take from somebody else. And this applies to any kind of writing, whether it's journalistic or fictional. You just want another pair of eyes on it. And especially with something like this, which unlike other comic stuff, like I love The Black Ghost and it's very dear to me and I love my novels, but this also felt very like I have to stick the landing. It felt very personal. And so she read it and she liked it, and then it just kind of the light bulb went off, and I thought, well, I knew she wanted to get into this space and do comics in some way, but it's also a very daunting for someone who's written mystery novels and is familiar as a reader, but maybe doesn't know how to get into it. There's no path, it's you are what you are, and it's hard to get into comics unless your agent finds a connection or what have you. And so I said, do you want to like jam on this? There's no expectation and no pressure. And if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. It was very low stakes. And then she just added so much cool stuff and it became this really interesting collaboration. And I love co-writing. I think it's really fun. Like Matt Rosenberg and I have done a bunch of stuff together. Monica Gallagher co-writes The Black Ghost. I think there's a lot to be said. And comics is just, it's like you're jamming with other people. And you want the end product to be so much greater than what you would have brought in on your own. So, I came in thinking that this project would be very personal and just, I'd limit, it would be something that I would drive, and it ended up becoming this really collaborative team effort, which was fun. And everyone's really added a lot of cool stuff.
I do think co-writing is sometimes I think people look at it and they're like, why are there co-writers? And like, how does that work? What's going on? But, it seems to me as an outsider that it's exactly what you're saying a lot of times, where maybe it's somebody that's entering the space for the first time and like, you just want to, help them figure it out. Or this sounds demeaning and I don't mean it in that way, but it's like, it's a good case. It's like training wheels to a certain degree, where it's like, we're going to help you figure out how to ride a bike. And then after that, we're going to let you ride your bike yourself. And
and Liz is just great at, you're totally right. I'm sorry. She's great at character, and she she's really great at world building, and I think she just wanted that door to be opened, and it was probably a really comfortable way to start because a lot of the framework was there, and it just felt like she could come in and add her parts and then really cut loose. And there was a safety net, I guess. And I do think sometimes fans see co-writing as a stigma in a weird way, like, oh, this writer is coming in to help this other writer meet a deadline or what have you. But I think a lot of times it's two friends who just want to like jam on something and make the thing they come up with together greater than what they would have done by themselves.
Yeah, I mean, and I think sometimes too, it's like people might perceive it as like, oh, this is a scheduling issue. It's helping the person. But I know a lot of times it's just like you said, it's friends, or it's like, you know, I know Marvel, you know, for one, has a tendency of bringing on co-writers that are like writers who haven't written anything for them before. And maybe they're trying to give them an inside look at how things work. And so like that type of thing is really helpful. And I don't know. I mean, it is interesting what earns a stigma in comics, but I feel like co-writing is definitely not one of those things that deserves it.
Yeah. I remember at DC when the last time I was at DC, you saw a lot of like mentoring, like, you know, Scott Snyder had James kind of come in and co-write some stories and then go off and do his own stuff. And Jeff Lemire and Ray Fox did a lot of stories together. And it was a good way to just get in the door. And I don't see the stigma, and I'm biased, obviously, participating in it. But I don't. You know, I think that's how. And I wish novels did it more often too. Like I'm working on something with another writer, and we're jamming on a novel-esque project together, and it's fun. I mean, I've done it. I think working in comics may be much more flexible to it in prose, and I don't think there's a downside to jamming with someone. And I come from a journalism background, so I'm not as precious about my words. You know, I want feedback, and I'm open to collaborating. So to me, it's not a big deal if someone comes in and says, this doesn't work, let's try this. And it's actually, if it makes it better in the end, we're all going to benefit. Well,
yeah, I totally agree with that. But well, let's talk about the other half, David Hahn, who you already mentioned. Honestly, like I could ask why he was the right fit, but you've already talked about it a little bit, and it's pretty obvious too, because he has a very classic style. I mean, he was one of the artists on Batman 66 that kind of makes him feel right. But I guess, I mean, it sounds like he was on board before Elizabeth was. What made him the right fit for a story like this?
Yeah, he was. And David and I have wanted to work on something together for a long time. I just love his line work, and we have similar tastes, and he's done some indie stuff that, you know, not to give him too much high praise, but it reminds you of stuff like Love and Rockets. Like we have that same kind of aesthetic, like less is more, like this very Jaime Hernandez, Dan DeCarlo, Bruce Timm thing going on. That his just line work is so clean, but he's a great storyteller, and he had the pedigree. He's done Batman 66. He did Batman 66 meets Wonder Woman 77, and he definitely gets to the tropes, and he loves superheroes, and he's just a nice guy. And I think in comics, a lot of times it's just, you know, finding people that not only can do the job, but are fun to work with, because comics can be a slog. You know, It's a long process. It's especially when it's something creator owned, where you are doing a lot of stuff on spec. You're kind of just, you're using up creative energy on something that could go nowhere. And I think even in the early days with the Dusk, we didn't know what it was going to be. We were just like these big ideas. And then we drilled down a little bit into the character, and he did some designs. And then Elizabeth came in, and it kind of all came together more tightly into a pitch. And so he was up for that, and that was cool. And he definitely, I think his personality fit in. And we're all pretty low key, you know. Elizabeth's easygoing, I'm easygoing, David is, and Joe is kind of our wrangler. So,
Well,
Joe Illidge.
Yeah, I think that one of the things that comes up a lot when I talk with creators about the teams that really work, a lot of it's like you get along, but I think ultimately it comes down to trust. It's like David knows that he'll trust you to not like micromanage him or tell him how to do his job or something like that, or like if you do, it's going to be for the right reason, and you can trust David to execute it in like the exact right way that you want. I mean, I do want to give a quick shout out to the design for the Dusk, because I love the design for the Dusk's costume. It is fantastic, and I presume that was David that did it.
That was David, yeah. And it's so funny because we have so many great variants, like different cover takes. Like it's really a who's who of like so many great friends who've been willing to like help out, like Francesco Francavilla and Howard Chaykin and like Rebecca Isaacs and Jamal Eigel. And each one of them said in different ways, like, this design is cool. Like, this is neat. It's fun to draw. And that's the highest compliment. And I told David, I was like, you know, I don't know if it can get much better than this. Like, we've got this all-star crew saying your design is amazing. It just feels like it's been around for a long time.
It does. It does. I mean, it reminds me of, God, I mean, I'm trying to remember. It may have been Archie, so I apologize. No, I don't think it was. Yeah. But I was going to say that there was like God, was it Dark Horse? Captain Midnight, when they were doing like all those pulp heroes again? It kind of reminds me of like a more pulp style, and I guess that's where Batman's roots are in a lot of ways, is like the more pulp style hero, especially with the cape. The cape has a very like pulp hero type vibe to it, but at the same time, it's like I love the costume and how it incorporates the identity into it. I also think that there's a very fitting nature to the name, given the fact that you're trying to have this character that's built on the roots of superheroes, but like maybe is a little bit lighter because this character is trying to find a different way to do it. It's like the light right before the full dark and everything. I don't know. There's very nice symmetry to all of this. It's good stuff.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And I think I'm glad you noticed that, because sometimes, you know, you're in the weeds doing this stuff and you're like, are we just overthinking this? But David, you know, it's just like, is anyone even going to tell? And, you know, the logo, you know, the emblem he came up with fed so well into the logo of the book that, you know, Dylan Todd designed. It just it feels like it's all clicking, which is nice, and I hope people enjoy it. That's the big thing.
Yeah. Well, okay, I did want to ask on a larger scale about like what this book is, because, you know, you're doing this for, there's a reason for it. You're doing it because your son, and, you know, wanting him to read a book that is a little bit more nuanced in the way that the real world is. And, you know, I'm sure that there are a lot of sons and a lot of daughters and a lot of everyone who could probably benefit from more stories like this. Is this the type of thing that you would want to see more of out of comics? Even if it isn't just the Dusk, just more of this type of hero that reflects the complicated nature of the world?
Yeah, I would love it. I mean, I think, again, it's not that the stuff that's happening now isn't entertaining or evocative, or, you know, I'm still a regular, I work in comics, but I'm also, I read them for fun. You know, it's just part of my DNA. But I would love to see something that's skewed a little younger while still, you know, the challenge with any entertainment is, do you go narrow and do you try to hit a certain audience and just kind of appeal to them, or do you try to widen the spotlight a bit and entertain at different levels? And I was reading something. There's this sequential Sequart book about Chris Claremont's Uncanny Run, and it literally like talks about every issue he wrote in that first Uncanny X-Men run. And one of the reviews talked about how he's talking about these deeper issues, but he also realizes there's certain beats he has to hit to like entertain the people that are there to watch the superhero stuff. And I think there's a moment where Psylocke says, okay, now it's time for some gratuitous, like, heroic action. Mm-hmm. So I think that the challenge, I think it's harder sometimes to try to appeal to more, but I would love to see more of that, more things that appeal to younger readers while still entertaining us, you know, these, you know, older, you know, people who are more familiar with the tropes and the ins and outs of the genre. And that's why something like Batman the Animated Series works so well, and it's such a touchstone for us just in terms of, like, you know, the high bar, because I can watch it now being like an older, more jaded viewer and reader and still come away with it entertained and feeling like they accomplished something, and I can see what some of the subtext is and I can see what they were going for. But I can show that to my son when he's a little older, and he'll just be entertained because it's a cool adventure. And that's kind of the goal.
I gotta say, I never really need a reason to have unsolicited praise for this book, but one title that does this very well is The Unbeatable Squirrel Girl.
Yes.
Squirrel Girl is amazing at this. I mean, I've basically chewed Ryan North's ear off telling him about how much I love the nonviolent solutions that Doreen Green comes up with for supervillains. I mean, like, half the time she just makes friends with them, or like, I mean, she went to an escape room with Kraven the Hunter. I mean, it's like unbelievable. and so I mean, I do like that. I mean, I think that book of itself, it sounds like The Dusk is going to be one that's going to kind of get in this range too, is like, shows that there are different ways that you can do these things, and that punching is not always the best solution.
That's exactly it. And I think there's some irony to like some of the preview pages we show on the Kickstarter. Like, it's a little bit of a hat tip to the opening sequence of Batman the Animated Series with the bank. There's a bank blowing up, and then you see the robbers come out, and then the Dusk appears, and he takes a swing at them. But this is the beginning of his journey when he's thinking like, this is the way this is done. But even then, at day one, he's still saying, I really wish I didn't have to do it this way. Like, this kind of sucks that you're pushing me into this corner where I have to like take a swing at you. And so that's kind of the springboard for him. And I really wanted it. I didn't want him to be so, pathological and dark and, driven by tragedy. Yeah. I mean, sometimes people become lawyers or become heroes because it's the right thing to do. And like, how do you do good when when we live in these complicated times, and every era has its issues, and, but I wanted him to be lighthearted and not in a kind of jokester Peter Parker way, but Spider-Man way, but more just, he's confident. He knows who he is. He can make a joke and a quip, but he also realizes that there's work to be done.
Mm-hmm. I will say that the idea that lawyers are very dark people is very not fair, because like, at least in my experience, like the two lawyers that I know in town are two of the more cheerful people I know. So it's like they totally ruin the archetype of the brooding one. I guess it sounds like these are all more Mark Waid. Apparently just all Mark Waid Daredevil versus like all the other Daredevils.
Yeah, and I love noir. I mean, I write noir and dark things, and the Black Ghost is kind of the other side of the coin here, if we're looking at it that way, where it's, Laura is a recovering alcoholic, and she's kind of pulling herself out of the gutter and trying to do good, after much tragedy in her own life. And, Jaime doesn't have that. He doesn't have that, Bruce Wayne moment. He doesn't have that Daredevil moment where he's hit by a truck and given these powers. Like, he just wants to do good, and it is much more a Wally West or Mark Waid Daredevil with an understanding and appreciation for the other stuff. It's just, sometimes it's okay to go a little lighter.
Yo, everybody. I want to take a quick second to give a shout out to Macroverse. Macroverse is an exciting digital comics platform that makes next-gen comics custom crafted for your phone. Macroverse's comics utilize its unique tap story format, which ensures this isn't a PDF on an iPad or an endless scroll, but a designed for a mobile experience where every episode is crafted to take advantage of this one-of-a-kind style. Macroverse is curated for quality, with every series they publish being something they believe deserves to be read by a massive audience. Think of it like HBO for comics, with over 35 titles and 400 episodes from names like Brian Stelfreeze, Juan Doe, Paul Scheer, and more. Check out Macroverse today by downloading the app on iOS or Google Play, and get started with a rotating collection of free episodes, or unlock the entire universe for just $4.99 a month, with half of all profits going to the creators themselves. And now, back to the show. Oh man, you have me at Wally West, by the way, because I am currently sitting next to a piece of Chris Somney art of Bart Allen as Impulse, and then on the other side I have Doc Shaner having Wally West and Impulse running together. So I am definitely your target market for that.
Well, I always gush to you. Like, I think I DM you at least once a year saying I just re-listened to that Mark Waid interview, and it's just so good. It's just it was, to me, it's one of those, not to get too meta where we're talking about your podcast on your podcast, but it's one of those moments where I can tell there's a passion for the work, and Mark is such a great interview, and it's just fun. These kind of conversations are more fun than, when does the book come out? Like, what's it about? Like, how, the perfunctory questioning that sometimes we get.
Oh man, I was totally just going to do one of the perfunctory lines though, so I'm going to do it anyways. It was a good transition though, because you're starting to talk about like how you do get into the dark stuff, and that's one of the things that's always really struck me as being amusing is not the right word, but I mean, you work for Archie. Previously, you worked for DC and publicity and everything, and then you had worked for Wizard, right? You'd worked for Wizard,
yeah.
So you have this like, I don't know. I mean, like I would say generally speaking, like outwardly cheerful stuff. And then, like, when you're actually working on your own stuff, it's almost always, like, crime and vigilante types. Like with The Black Ghost, your Comixology original series that arrives in trade in May from Dark Horse. Or even, like I mentioned, your Poe Dameron book. You did a Poe Dameron book set in the Star Wars universe. And what is it? It's a crime story.
Yeah.
We got to get into that. Why are you such a crime guy?
It's so funny because when I was at DC, the first time I worked at DC, 2006 to around 2009, I mean, I'd worked in comics in some form for a while. At that point, I'd worked at Wizard, like you said, and Wizard was my first real, like, full-time job, and first time really, like, living away from home. But at DC, that was the first time that I was in it, you know, like in the industry in terms of the creative side, or at least working with the creative people. And I got to see, you know, your bird's eye view on really talented people like Greg Rucka, Gail Simone, Brad Meltzer, Jeff Johns, like Scott Snyder. Like, it's a who's who of like great talents. And but on the flip side of that, comics is your job. Like, you get a stack. I got the stack of every DC release on, you know, that week, and you have to read through it, and it's work. It becomes your work, and it's the best job. You know, it's not a complaint, but I needed something else. Like, I needed another kind of creative outlet, and so I started really reconnecting with crime fiction, and I was reading books by people like Laura Lippman and Dennis Lehane and James Ellroy, Michael Connolly, and George Pelecanos, and these authors that, you know, took the tropes of crime fiction but modernized it, and you had these really flawed protagonists, and you could really relate to these people. Like, it wasn't just like the steel-jawed, fedora-wearing detective sitting in his office, like taking a swig from the bottle in his desk as the femme fatale walks in. Like, and I love that. I think there's a place for that, but these stories felt so much more personal and flawed and real. And then I just started writing my own. I thought, you know, there should be one set in Miami, and there should be one with a Cuban American protagonist, and there should be one where he's younger. And that's kind of where Pete was born. He just kind of showed up in my head, and I just started writing it as this side thing. And I never thought it would be anything more than just something I did to kind of shake it, you know, do something else, you know, just think about something else and work in another space. And I tell my friends, you know, I'm not really good at having hobbies. They end up becoming careers. And so then the novel thing became its own thing. And, you know, I don't really do stuff for fun, I guess. It's just become a job, which is fine.
Well, but okay. So as a person who also has job hobbies, I will say that one underrated part about it is like, God, what was, I think it was artist Liana Kangas had tweeted something about like, what are you going to do? You know, what, you know, freelancers, what do you do to like escape from like the work or something like that? I'm like, I do my other work and like, I take joy from that. Like, you know, I mean, like doing this podcast, I mean, I think it's probably abundantly clear to anybody who listens to it that I don't do it because I don't enjoy it. I do it because I do enjoy it. And it's like, you know, doing my stuff for Sketched, I enjoy that too. And it's like, I imagine, you know, whether it's like, you know, writing about Pete, or if it's, you know, doing the Black Ghost, or, you know, writing that Poe Dameron book, it's just like finding solutions to problems and writing these stories. They may be work, but that doesn't mean they can't be fun too.
Yeah, I mean, the Poe stuff was so cool. And you know, everyone always asks like, oh, what was it like? Did they just tell you what to write? And of course, yes, you're working for this huge like media brand. They're of course going to want you to do certain things, but I was so blown away at what I could just create, you know, to basically, you know, tell Poe's origin story, create new characters, like get to play with Zori Bliss, who I thought was such a cool addition to the mythos. And then really like the nerdy part for me was I was reading this book called McMafia that Greg Rucka had suggested years ago that basically lays out how criminal organizations cropped up in the wake you know, after the fall of the Soviet Union, and that really influenced like how I layered in what the organized crime structure is in the Star Wars universe, like after Return of the Jedi. So that was like the nerdy stuff for me, to be able to like weave in things like that and like, you know, think about it in that way. And on the other end of it, you know, someone's reading and they're like, this is a cool like space crime romp, like it's a fun adventure, and I'm glad it works on those levels. But for me, it was fun just in terms of like being additive to the mythos. I don't know if I answered your question.
Oh, I mean, I was just,
yeah.
You're having fun with it. And that's ultimately what matters. I mean, I do have to quickly mention this because I do find it fascinating. You threw this in as an aside in an email to me, but I find it deeply interesting. You're also writing a comic for NPR, which is absolutely wild. You mentioned earlier that you're on the Planet Money podcast talking about IP and like how the hosts were trying to basically take the shortest path possible to millions by buying a superhero from a publisher to merchandise it. And so they got a public domain character named Microface, which I love, and you're writing a comic about it, and that is like the weirdest thing to do. I mean, I do want to point out though that is, if there's any better proof that you are a workaholic, it is the fact that you're writing a public domain character for an NPR podcast. You really
Yeah.
love working.
Yeah, no, it's yeah. I think sometimes I'll rattle off what I'm doing, and my wife is like, how do you have this time to do that? Like,
How are you talking to me right now?
yeah, like, why are you even wasting time talking? But it was interesting. I was on the podcast on Planet Money because they wanted to talk to someone, a publishing executive, and they wanted to do the spiel and see if they could. At some point they asked me, look, is there a character at Archie we can buy? And I think I said, oh, I'm qualified to say no. I'm not able to say yes, but I'm definitely going to say no. And basically it was an exploration of IP and the value of IP and why, even smaller comic book companies, you can't put a dollar amount on something like a superhero because you don't know. You're one story away from it becoming a thing and then becoming a movie and then becoming this really lucrative thing.
It's a lottery.
But then in their Planet Money, yeah, exactly. You don't know what it's going to be. And then in their Planet Money way, they said, well, we're going to make a comic book and we want it to be a public domain hero. And it's going to be this guy Microface. Do you want to write it? And of course I said, yes, I just think it's such a cool idea. And, we got Jerry Ordway to do the cover because I think Jerry is just perfect in terms of, he has such a love for Golden Age stuff and he can take these Golden Age elements like he did with things like All-Star Squadron or Infinity Inc. and even up to this day, like taking Golden Age stories and modernizing them and adding to that kind of DC legacy of it. Peter Krause is doing the interiors and I'm just working with them on the story now. And it's going to be a legacy hero. It's like a modern version of Microface. And it's been a lot of fun. And it's just so surreal because you're really tapping into an audience that is different from the traditional kind of comics people. Like if this were released as just a standard thing, I don't know if it would resonate, but having that platform and having really connecting with like NPR and the people that listen to it, I think it's just something that's going to resonate. So that was interesting to me, just having this, they're just selling it on their website. So, it's a really kind of unique product.
Yeah. You do have a very interesting mix of books. I mean, I have to imagine I don't know, it's tough. Like, I imagine you have to really consider what you say yes to and what you say no to, because as your wife has probably said to you, there's only so much time in a day. And you do have like your separation of church and state, your Archie day, and then you have like the rest of it and everything. And it's a lot to balance. But I do want to jump into Archie, though, like to close. I just have a few questions. I know you can't go too deep into things, but I find Archie to be, again, the company that you're co-president of, to be very fascinating. And I've written about this a number of times on Sketch, because I think, and I'm not trying to defame Archie, but I think the public perception from the outside is that the comic side might be more of this old school idea, even if Riverdale itself is extremely not. But, looking at the moves you make in the past, or not even, like just through the totality of like this modern time, I think Archie really might be one of the most forward-thinking publishers. Like, last year brought reveals that you all are putting together an original title for Webtoon, which I wrote about on Sketch, and Webtoon is basically like the biggest comic publisher, and a lot of people don't even realize it. And that you were going day and date on Comixology Unlimited. Plus, you were both the only publisher that I think kept digital comics coming out during the Diamond shutdown, at least to a certain degree. And you also offered a ton of options to the retailers, as you mentioned earlier. That's a sea of words. I know that's a lot. But I guess my question, my question is like, why is Archie? Why are you all always experimenting with what you do and trying to find new solutions to all these problems that you face?
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that there is still a disconnect, and I think there should be more connective tissue, because I don't think Riverdale as a pop culture phenomenon would exist if, when John Goldwater, our CEO, came in, if he hadn't said, let's make this feel now. Let's make these, at that point, Archie was very retro. It was very kind of, I don't want to say stuck in amber, but it felt very, the stories were sitcom-y, the same classic stories, but they also felt like they were happening in the past. It felt very Pleasantville. And I think when John came in, he said, let's modernize it. Like, there's no reason even the classic stories, they should feel like they're happening today. There's, the Riverdale should be a diverse and welcoming place. And so that got the ball rolling. And you saw like Kevin Keller introduced and Tony Topaz and so many different characters. And then to really like turn up the volume and do stuff like Afterlife and Life with Archie, where you're in the future and Archie's married, and you have all these different kind of real world problems seeping into that classic narrative. And then the Wade Staples Archie, I think, really kicked the door down and said, you can look at these characters in a different way, in a much more YA modern sensibility. And it's still Archie. I think as a brand, for me, when I moved from DC to Archie, everyone's like, well, why would you do that? Like, Batman and Superman are such icons. But to me, Archie was as big of an icon. It's the awareness is there. Everyone knows these characters. And so that awareness grants you some flexibility. You can put him in a zombie apocalypse. You can have him meet the Ramones. You can do all these weird things to him, have the Predator show up twice. And as long as the characters are still themselves, people are cool with that. I mean, you see it with other brands too, like Scooby-Doo, or of course, Batman's the best example. He's a Lego character. He can appeal to all age groups. And so I think the publishing in many ways teed up the entertainment. And so maybe because I'm on the inside and I see it, the connective tissue, it's more obvious to me. But as far as today, I think Archie's always been accessible. It's always been the comic you found everywhere. You could go into a comic shop and it would be there, and that's obviously a big part of our business model. But you could also go into a grocery store and you can check it out in your library. Obviously, that's not just us, but I think that mentality has driven a lot of the decisions we make. Like, so why not do a podcast on Spotify? Why not be on Webtoon, which is this huge platform that is going to tap into an audience that maybe we aren't connecting with yet. And in terms of the digital stuff, I think we just wanted to give people stuff to read, even during this challenging time, even when comics were not available. And we did it, like you said, concurrently with trying to make sure we were helping retailers as much as we could. And for something during that period, we released something like Sabrina, the Teenage Witch, the fantastic Kelly Thompson, Veronica and Andy Fish book. We released that digitally, but then we also made sure we had a print version. It's not either or for us. I think we have digital Archie readers who read Archie stuff digitally only, and then we have comic shop readers, and then there obviously there's going to be a percentage that does both. But we always want to make sure that Archie is everywhere. We try to make it as accessible through every platform. We had this really vibrant partnership with Scholastic, and for me, I mean, Scholastic is the high watermark in terms of connecting with kids and connecting with teens. And they've been doing these great prose novels set in the Riverdale and Chilling Adventures universe, but then it's also expanded into like YA versions of stuff like Jughead the Hunger and Vampironica. They did this book called A Werewolf in Riverdale, which is a prose novel that takes the elements of Jughead the Hunger, but tweaks it and makes it into, it fits into this platform or this medium. So I think flexibility, being accessible. I never want to hear from someone, oh, I wanted to read this, but I couldn't find it.
Right.
I didn't have a way to find it. So, it's all about parity and making it available and also trying these new things. We announced we're doing this partnership with this company, Graphic Audio, and they do audiobooks for comics, which at first blush might sound a little weird. Like, why would you listen to a comic when you can read a comic? But it's also, it's an accessibility thing, but it's also a different way to experience the story, and if maybe you want to experience it this way, or maybe that's the only way you can experience the story. And it's about making sure that people that want to engage with the brand can find a way to do it, and it'll be entertaining and it'll really introduce them to what we do.
Yeah. I mean, this all makes perfect sense given the idea that you're trying to be everywhere, because the thing is everywhere, the idea of it has changed. It's not the same thing. And that's one of the things that's long frustrated me about comics. And, I'm not going to besmirch anyone or anything like that, but it's just like it has long felt as an outsider that there's a rigid idea of what comics could or should be. And I appreciate that flexibility. I mean, whether it's flexibility involving like being on different platforms, or if it's flexibility of like doing something like, what was it? Red Sonja Vampirella meets Betty and Veronica? Was that one? Yeah. I mean, like, I love that stuff, because it's just like, if you can merge these ideas together, or if you, I mean, it's all about having fun. You don't do Archie meets Predator because you're like, I'm going to do like, maybe you did. I actually haven't read it, so I can't confirm whether or not anybody was gruesomely murdered. But at the same time, it is like, it's just about having fun with ideas. And I do think.
Yeah, one thing that John Goldwater says often that is very true. It's like, this is comics. Like, let's have fun. Like, let's just entertain people and entertain ourselves, and like, just, let's keep it light.
Yeah.
Maybe not always in terms of the content, but in terms of the execution.
Yeah. I do want to say one thing involving Webtoon that is a really great fit. I mean, I did a lot of research into them, and one of the tricky things for a lot of publishers, you know, for example, and this is not me besmirching them, but AWA put their books on there, and AWA's books are a very poor fit for the audience. When you look at the books that are the most, or the comics that are the most successful on Webtoon, it's typically romance and slice of life and fantasy and things like that. But you know who does fit really well? Archie. And I like that. I mean, granted, we don't know what the story is going to be, but I do like that because that's a perfect idea of marrying subject with audience.
Yeah, it's interesting. The platform is great, and obviously we were happy to be partnering with them. But I was introduced to them, I think, seeing some more traditional comic creators doing stuff there, like Monica Gallagher has her webcomic Assassin Roommate is on there, and Dean Haspiel, who's done some work for Archie, has the Red Hook there, and that's kind of what pulled me in. And I realized, like you said, the content. It felt like there was room for an Archie story. It wouldn't be like a traditional Archie story or even like a aged up YA Archie story. It would have to be a webtoon version of the characters, but we have that flexibility. So I felt like when we talked to them, I just said, look, you can take the characters and make it something that fits your platform. And as long as it's true to Archie and it's, you know, Betty's acting like Betty and Veronica's acting like Veronica in the greater sense of what they are, then we're good. And I think people will be surprised and entertained, which is the goal.
Yeah. Well, I do have a question from a patron that is a very big question. It's from Carl Troy.
Okay.
And I'm gonna streamline it. Just, I mean, it's not like long. It's just like it is a big one. Carl was basically wondering, you know, from traditional comic shops to Webtoon to Kickstarter's distribution. He was interested in what your perception on what next is, because, you know, there's so many different ways you can do things. Like, do you see the consumption of comic books evolving in the next like 3 to 5 years?
Yeah, I mean, it's always going to be changing. I think the pandemic threw a wrench into everything. You know, all our systems were shaken and paused and disrupted. And I think people are always going to read comics. That's, you know, I think everyone you know, there's always that immediate, like, everything is falling apart, the sky is falling whenever something happens, and people want to be doom and gloom about it. But I think we're just going to evolve with the way people consume their comics. I think digital is a great platform, but that's also like, it's not for everyone. Some people want to have that tactile experience. So there's always going to be a desire for holding the comic and reading it. And then there's other readers, like I read a lot digitally. I also still pick up trades or pick up comics at the shop. I think you'll see one thing I look to, I'm a music person too, and I think you are as well. The way records have evolved and kind of risen again as this, not as a collectible item, but also as a pushback against streaming and having everything be this ethereal thing on your phone. Like the ceremony of opening the record sleeve and placing it on the record player and looking at the cover art, like that's never going to go away for people that love that. And It's never going to go away for people that love comics. I think there's a huge part of the readership that still want that. And I think that's really important, and that's not going to go away. I think you'll see tweaks. You'll see people do Kickstarters, and you'll see people do web comics. But there's always the touchstone's always going to be, I think, the print version for a lot of people. I don't know if that really answered what he was saying, but I think, I think it will evolve. I think it will evolve. I don't presume to predict what will evolve. I think people just need to stay flexible and stay tapped in. And I loved your Webtoon piece. I thought it was really smart, and I think we as an industry would benefit from zooming out more. Like, it's not just what we're doing, you know, in terms of, you know, publishing comics, but there's the bigger publishing industry. Like, there's like, what are the trends in publishing and what are people reading and what are these different methods that maybe we can tap into and try. And I think we just need to stay flexible and stay, you know, with our ear to the ground, because things are always changing.
Yeah. I mean, I think flexibility is the key word there, though, because, you know, I think that one of the things that's always kind of taken me aback, and I'm doing a lot of slandering unnecessarily, and this is not slander. Heidi McDonald, friend of mine, love Heidi, she's great, has always been like, this is the death of the floppy comic, and I'm like, no. I mean, like, I don't think that the idea that comics are going to reduce is the direction that we're going. I don't think it's going to be that we're going to go towards one product. I think if anything we've learned from the digital era, it's that there's going to be broader diversity in products, that most things are not going to be one thing. They're going to be a lot of things. That transitions into my last question, because I feel like this is a very nice transition. I'm very proud of myself right now, Alex. So
I'm ready.
You're a novelist, you're a comic writer, you're an executive. You have a very interesting career that is definitely defined by not being any one thing, just like comics. But I'm curious, could you imagine being any one of those things exclusively?
No, I mean, I think I would just get bored. I like to keep here's what I tell a lot of people is I like the camaraderie of an office. I like collaborating with people on projects, and I love working with talent. I love being an editor or being a publicist and being kind of that close and seeing the process. Like I'm always happy to say that I try to be, I'm the kind of editor that wants people to do what they were brought in to do. I like to let people be creative. So I feel like I learned something in that process, and then being able to be creative on my own stuff is something that I would never want to give up. So I don't think I could just be one. I think I'd just get bored or just not that there wouldn't be enough to do. It's just, I feel like it all feeds into the other.
Yeah. I mean, they all kind of lift each other. It's like a rising tide that lifts all ships. It is funny though, because like I had that question as something I knew I wanted to ask, but as we were doing this having this conversation, I was like, oh man, the answer is definitely no. The answer is definitely no.
Yeah, I mean, even before I was doing anything like published, I felt like I was learning. I felt like even when I first started at DC, it was such a crash course in story and just how to behave and how to be an author. Like I remember sheepishly asking Brad Meltzer. Like Brad Meltzer was the first person I even told, like in the creative community. I was like, I'm working on this book. And I felt like it was improper because I was like his publicist. Like, why am I talking to him about this other thing I'm doing on the side? And it really taught me a lesson in how to just be helpful to others and how to be, reach out your hand. Because he immediately said, okay, whenever you're done with it, just let me know and I'll give you a blurb. And that to me just felt like it was such a nice thing he didn't have to do. He could have been like, oh, cool, that's nice. Can you just book me this interview? Like do your job and stop like wasting my time with this weird thing you're doing. And that's really been, it's really taught me how to, kind of comport myself with, be helpful and try to understand that we're all going through a lot of things and everyone's got their stuff. So anyway.
I love it.
Yeah.
No, I mean, that's great. I think it's totally fine that you're more than one thing because God only knows we kind of all are at this point, Alex. But Alex, that is all I have for you. Thank you so much for coming on to talk about the Dusk, your crime life, the pandemic, and everything else. I appreciate you taking the time.
Oh, thanks so much. I listened to the podcast as a fan, and I love your work. So it was great to be here. Thanks so much.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Off Panel with writer Alex Segura. You can find him on Twitter in the currently being Kickstarted graphic novel The Dusk, as well as the upcoming print release of The Black Ghost at Dark Horse. Love Off Panel and want to support it? Subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts today and give the show a rating and review while you're at it, but 5 stars only. You can also support the show by backing it on Patreon. Find the show at patreon.com/offpanel, and when you back it on there, you get early access to each week's podcast as well as weekly content and more. Want even more? Subscribe to my subscription comic site, Sketched, at sketch.com for long-form articles, interviews, and the rest of the site's content and its members-only forum. You can find Off Panel and Sketched on social media by liking it on Facebook at /Sketched, that's SKTCHD, follow on Twitter and Instagram at @SketchComic, or following me at @SliceFriedGold. Big thanks to all my existing patrons, including Scott Buon, Michael Tunk, Canadian by Proxy, Johnny Kanan, Zach Thompson, Bradley Roeder, Carl Troy, Megan Marsden, Brandon DePillis, Patrick Brower, Declan Shalvey, Dan Garino, Josh Williamson, Adam Freeman, Ben Wild, Brian Klein Q, SB, Antonio Offen, Nick Bennett, Daniel Whitfield, Scotty Young, Susanna Polo, Jeff Weira, Reed Hinkley Barnes, Mario Tiambang, AbductedTheComic.com, Andrew Carita, Matt Mahoney, Charlie Chu, Stephen Hole, Pensacola Pop Comics, Kim Eslem, Philip Myra, Christian Shelton, Kenny Porter, Chris Pacello, Torin Grunbeck, Buzz Bubbles, Christopher Todd, Transmitter Down, Waltz Comics and Books, Carl Mizell, Danny Ollie, Paul Salate, Sakil Wilson, Alex Dimitriopoulos, Terry Dodson, Liana Kangas, Wesley Gift, Sean Kirkham, Alistair Ross, Julio Anta, Brett A. Schmidt, Jason Goodmanson, Paul Reinwatt, Vita Ayala, Tara Ferguson, Dave Slusher, WMQ Comics, Akil Kokachi, Phil White, Sean Pinello, Kent Heidelman, Philip Seavey, Al Ewing, Ryan Alcock, David Kelly, Rob Wilson IV, Nick Polito, Owen McCready, Brendan Fletcher, Gary Maloney, Jonathan Nilsson, Matthew Groom, Jason Massey, Adam Bogert, Matthew Taylor, Nick Patera, Jacob Sorelli, Ford Gilmore, David Braldy, Nick Hall, Bjorn Basin, John Hendricks, Steve Anderson, Ian Maxwell, Cliff Chang, Benjamin Shipper, Colin McMahon, Chris Palmer, Scott McGovern, Nathan Fairbairn, Kat McKenzie, Adam Highfield, Fiona Staples, Chris O'Halloran, Mark Abnett, Mike Murphy, Michael Shirley, Tom Barnett, Jim Demonakos, Norbert, Nicolo, James Kaplan, and Mission Comics and Art in San Francisco. You guys are all the best. A quick thanks to Upright T-Rex Music, who wrote and performed Ah Panel's theme song just for the show. Check out their music on Spotify because it's completely delightful. Thanks for listening, and tune in next week for another episode.